So I welcome you for this second lecture series of the ICWA-IFS Virtual Lecture which we've had. The first lecture was with DG ICWA, Dr. TCA Raghavan, and today we are very delighted to have Ambassador Venkatesh Varma with us to speak on the topic diplomacy in the age of geopolitics. And this, I would like to request at the start of this meeting that everyone put their mics off and only switch it on when you need to speak. You can also type your questions on the chat box, which is available. And I would like to, again, once again, welcome all of you to this meeting. This lecture series will be moderated by Dr. Anupam Ray, who will be moderating this session this evening. And we thank you, sir, for doing that. And without much ado, I'd like to give the floor to you.
It's to me. So thank you. Thank you, Gloria. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever in the world you are. I'm signing in from Sapru House in New Delhi. This is the second lecture in the series that has been launched jointly by the IFS Association and ICWA. The speaker today is Ambassador D.B. Venkatesh Varma. Many of you know him. To those who joined the service lately, many of you would certainly have heard of him. He studied at a little bit of his biography. He studied at JNU. He belongs to the 1988 batch of the Indian Foreign Service. His CFL is Russian. At headquarters, he served in Policy Planning Division. He was in the External Affairs Minister's Office, in the Prime Minister's Office, and most recently as Joint Secretary for Disarmament and International Security Affairs. He served in Moscow and in Geneva in missions. He's been permanent representative of India to the Conference on Disarmament. He was ambassador to Spain, and currently he's ambassador in Moscow, one of the most important positions that an Indian Foreign Service officer can hold. These are the dry facts of a career, impressive when reading out. It is a glittering career. Ambassador Varma is known in our service as an expert. He's an expert on disarmament. He's an expert on Russia. He's an expert on geopolitics. He was, when I remember that 15 years ago or whenever that the time was when we came in as just about when we were deputy secretaries or directors, he was an officer we really looked up to. He had just won the first SK Singh award for Indian Foreign Service officers. He had served a tenure in the Prime Minister's office. He had worked on the India-US nuclear deal, one of the historic moments in our foreign policy. Legend has it that, I don't know, he never told me this, but I hear, legend has it that he briefed the cabinet on parts of it when he was a deputy secretary or director. He certainly played a key role in devising key components of the that made the agreement such a path-breaking one. I have served with him, I would say, when I was posted in PMI New York, and he used to come in from Geneva for attending the General Assembly First Committee sessions. He was a great negotiator with an encyclopedic knowledge of rules, procedures, and precedents. To watch him in multilateral fora was an education and a pleasure. And I gather from my friends in the disarmament circuit that he is something of a legend in that area. At a personal level, he's been something of a mentor to me. He's been a source of advice. And most importantly, he's been an inspiration. He inspired officers, and I'm one of them. I would unhesitatingly say that he's the most well-read officer in the service. It is a pleasure to interact with him and just to hear the number of books he's read, and what he advises you to read after that. He's the first serving officer that we have invited in this series, and that would give you some idea of the esteem that we hold him in. I'd like to end by saying that he is, in the true sense of the term, an officer and a gentleman. I mean, that's the way I think of him. An officer and a gentleman and an inspiration. Sir, the floor is yours, but just before that, I'd like to say that please mute your mics, as Gloria said. If you have questions, the format of the session is that we have requested Ambassador Varma to speak for about 20 to 25 minutes, after which there will be Q&A. We would like it to be interactive in nature, so please have your questions ready. If you would like to ask your questions, you can use the raise hand option, which is there on your screen, or you can type the question and send it in to me. At the end of after his speech, I'll put those questions to him, either in the order in which they came, or if they make sense, I'll clump them, or if they cohere together, I'll clump them together and ask them of him. Thank you. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Anupam, and it's 2:30 in the afternoon in Moscow, and greetings to everyone who've joined us from Delhi. We understand there's been a shower this afternoon and elsewhere in the world. Wherever you are, delighted to be part of this webinar. I'd like to thank the IFS Association and ICWA for inviting me. And this is the first time we are speaking to fellow colleagues and friends because of the COVID pandemic. I'd like to wish them the best of health to them, to their families, to their colleagues. And since many of you have been associated with the COVID-related evacuation as part of the Vande Bharat mission, I'd really like to convey my compliments for the extraordinary work that has been done, both in Delhi at the part of the COVID cell, the missions abroad, under the leadership of Foreign Secretary, MOS and External Affairs Minister, cooperation with civil aviation. I think the Ministry of External Affairs has done brilliantly, and we are very proud of how we have helped fellow citizens in distress all over the world. And I'm particularly proud of my own team that has worked flawlessly in Moscow, and many of them are young officers. And it is truly inspiring for all of us that the service in the country is in very good hands as we move forward. I'd like to thank Anupam for the invitation. Anupam is an old friend. We go back a long time, as he himself has recalled. I thank him for his very generous introduction. Anupam is, I think, a very good combination of a conformity and being a rebel. A perfect combination for being Joint Secretary Policy Planning, because you're conformist, you will have no new ideas. And I think conformity gives you the stable basis to have a good inquiring mind, which is, so I was a little surprised when he called me. I didn't know whether to place him on the conformity side of the ledger or the rebel side of the ledger when he reached out to me and said that I should speak at this webinar, but I put it down to his friendship that I have built up over the years, and I'm truly grateful. You don't know how happy ambassadors are when they're asked to speak. They're always looking out for an audience. I am no exception, I can say. The affliction becomes a little more acute when you cross into grade 1. I understand that it stays well into retirement, so that's where we are. This is a rather grandiose topic, diplomacy in the age of geopolitics. We'll unpack it systematically. We don't have all the answers, but at least let's spend this Saturday afternoon, and I thank everyone who's decided to spend their Saturday afternoon on this webinar, having a good discussion on some of the critical events and questions of our time. So let me use the PowerPoint presentation just to make it both visible and audible. I will continue to speak as we go forward and make a PowerPoint presentation. We are looking at diplomacy in the age of geopolitics, and we should ask ourselves the question, what is geopolitics? Well, geopolitics, of course, deals with geography, political power, historic memory. It is global, but of course, it's different from globalization. In geography, I think it's fairly obvious. Mountains, passes, sea lanes of communication, choke points, ports, deserts, plains, Suez Canal, Panama Canal. We are all familiar with those aspects of geography which are important for our work. It's a good student of geopolitics always keeps a political map and a physical map together. And I think in the age of geopolitics, of course, the physical map has something more to say than in normal times. Political power, we all understand what political power is. It is one of the original purposes of political power is territorial conquest and acquisition and consolidation. We are all territorial states. We don't live on water. We all live on land. Political power is built or declines on land. They are all territorial in nature. And political power, in a sense, tends to dominate geography or find access to geographical points, and both go together. And if you put in historic memory, and historic memory is quite an important element, it's not so obvious, it's quite unusual. But when you look at people, people have strong historic memories related to the land where they live or where they have been evicted from or where they have had major events in their history. You ask a Scottish person the date on which the English defeated them, they will tell you the date. You ask the Poles how many times the Germans and the Russians went past their territory. Of course, they will remember the number of times it happens. The Middle East and Palestine is all historic memory. You have a very strong Palestinian case. You have very strong Jewish case. All go back several centuries. The latest example is the Hagia Sophia, a structure that was built 1,500 years ago, was for several centuries a church, became a mosque, became a museum, and today now is a mosque again. And it has really wide impact. Prince Vladimir, who established Christianity in Russia, when he consolidated his power around Moscow, he sent across his ambassadors in 3 different directions to see which religion Russia should acquire. One group went to Rome and saw the cathedrals there and came back and said the Catholic Church is very good, but it's a little dull. They also went to parts of Russia and southern Russia where Islam was already there, and they said the religion is very good, but you're not allowed to have alcohol and pork. So Vladimir said, what is the point in living without drinking alcohol? Then he went, the team that had gone to Constantinople in those days came back and saw Hagia Sophia and said, that is the place where religion and art combine. And that is truly how Prince Vladimir got into Orthodox Christianity. It's a very strong and powerful force in Russia and the entire Slavic world. So that said, we can find examples in China. The Nanking massacre is remembered. Different. So the historic memory, in a sense, is a very powerful force. So when you combine geography, political power, and historic memory, you get various patterns of geopolitics, and patterns of geopolitics changes because sometimes political power dominates, sometimes geography, sometimes historic memory. but whatever. I mean, the Kurds have historic memory and geography. They have never had political power, and they dominate the politics of the region in northern Iraq, Iran, Turkey, and elsewhere. Geopolitics is global. You can't have local geopolitics. It has to add up to a global total, and it's also very different from globalization. They go together, but sometimes geopolitics and globalization are confused, but they're not. They're not the same. They're not the same. Geopolitics is the base and acquires a certain type of globalization according to the era of geopolitics. It survives, the particular type of globalization survives until a certain era of geopolitics is there. Once geopolitics changes, globalization withers and a new form of globalization does emerge. I mean, it's like geopolitics with globalization is Virat Kohli facing Muthaiya Muralitharan with all the gloves, the helmets, the guards, and the pura full paraphernalia that you see. Geopolitics without globalization is like Gavaskar 40 years ago facing Dennis Lilly with the barest of protection. But because you don't have globalization doesn't mean that you have geopolitics. Geopolitics is persistent, all pervasive. It will continue. You have to stay at the wicket, hit your runs, even if you get it on the shins. But that is how it is. We could dig deeper into geopolitics and see what are its 7 attributes. The 7 attributes are, you can divide it into continental power, maritime power, demography, technology, energy, economy, and climate change. And I'll quickly run through some of these points. Maybe if I were to make this presentation 5 years later, we would also have space and cyber power as a separate entity, but presently space and cyber are just evolving. I think they still don't have acquired a domain of their own. Continental power examples are easy. The United States is the continental power. Russia is a continental power. China is a continental power. The United States is both a continental power and a maritime power. China is a continental power, wants to become also a maritime power. And there are interconnections between the two. Of course, connectivity is what we normally call connectivity is a very important factor here. Connectivity can be seen as connectivity that provides access. And if it's connectivity that provides access only, it in a sense performs a global good, in a sense that is good for those who build the connectivity, the users, and those who are in the region. But you can also have connectivity or domination, and you have various examples of that, where connectivity or domination is to bypass existing connectivity issues or get access for a continental power to maritime points, or to force through political allocation of resources for strategic purposes. You can have connectivity of domination. Maritime powers approach connectivity differently. For maritime powers, of course, the main issue is freedom of navigation. You supported by international law and UNCLOS and the rest. Sometimes you have connectivities which begin as aspects of domination, but turn into aspects of global good. The Panama Canal was built by the Americans, 100 years ago as their own canal. But finally, today it belongs to Panama, but it also belongs to the entire world. I think there are no large political reasons why you can't have good access to the Panama Canal. Similarly, with the Suez Canal, it was built by the British and the French. French money. Finally, it came to the Egyptians. But now today though it belongs to Egypt, it belongs to everyone. We can see Vasco da Gama as a connectivity specialist because he combined several skills. I mean, he stole the monsoon patterns from the Arabs. He was rich enough and brave enough to acquire capital to find a way around the Cape of Good Hope. And so connectivity does take you pretty far. Demography is important because it's just not numbers. Obviously, the larger number of people you have, your geopolitics becomes stronger. But the numbers also have different connotations. Firstly, if you want numbers for a very strong army, continental powers require strong armies. You have to have a political system that either supports conscription or you can afford a volunteer army. Similarly, if you want to have a demography to support a good workforce, then you need to have a trained workforce, well educated, but also have a workforce that can support an aging population in terms of pensions and healthcare. This actually, the demographic factors, of course, impact pretty sharply on the political systems. And the United States today is a very good example where the political system is slightly disbalanced because the previous patterns of demographic interaction and how it interacts with the political system is in a state of flux. So therefore, to calculate power in the United States because of the demographic reasons, of course, is a task. And our ambassador now probably has a more difficult task than previous ambassadors in Washington. Technology is again another vast area. I mean, there are several examples. I'll mention just a few. Technology is one of the critical factors for geopolitics. Sometimes people make the mistake of saying it is the only factor. It is not, of course. It goes with several other factors. Genghis Khan and his Mongol hordes were able to travel from Mongolia to the doorsteps of Europe, primarily because they could sit on a horse and with one hand steadily and fight with the other hand, the invention of the stirrup. The steamboat, the telegraph, and the rail were critical for the 13 colonies in the United States to cross the Appalachian Mountains, to travel by the Mississippi River, go down and occupy the Mississippi Basin. And then you know what happened in Texas, the war with Mexico. They got lucky with Louisiana and Alaska. And you have modern day continental power of the United States. Nuclear power, the invention of tanks, and that led to a miscalculation of the Germans to invade Russia through blitzkrieg. The invention of missiles, satellites, of course, led to the creation of nuclear deterrence. Now we have new inventions which are impacting on new domains of conflict: artificial intelligence, cyber, space. Digital technologies, these are all important. In geopolitical terms, Taiwan is today a microchip superpower, and as a superpower in microchips is also, in a sense, a geopolitical factor that is of its own value. Energy, we all require energy. Geopolitical powers require preferential forms of energy. That is their constant endeavor. There is no free market in energy resources in the world. In the age of geopolitics, preferential energy access becomes even more important than in eras governed by globalization. Oil, gas, LNG, non-conventional energy sources. We have three major energy centers that are evolving in the next 20, 30 years. The United States will, of course, be foremost. It's become a major energy exporter and is willfully, by design, using energy as a political instrument. We can discuss that later. Russia remains an energy superpower with new discoveries, will continue to remain in the game for the next 100 years. So will be the Middle East. The patterns of geopolitics of energy is also changing. Once we had the OPEC, now we have the OPEC plus. We almost now have an OPEC plus plus. In the old days, just the producers had a lot of say, but gradually, I think the consumers are also having greater say in how the global energy structures are going to be are going to come about. You have the pipeline wars. You have the old Soviet era pipelines going into Europe. You have the American pressure on Europe to cut down on Russian gas supplies. The United States is actually spending money or forcing their allies in Europe, like Poland, to buy LNG at rates which are more expensive than Russian gas. There has been an attempt in Europe to bypass Russia and Eastern Europe. There have been new pipelines coming from the Nord Stream 1 and 2. You also have Turkish Stream and others. Russia, China have huge energy investments that will go in the next 20, 30 years. Economy, GDP, which is obvious. I will not spend too much time on that. Climate change, I think water, deserts, the Arctic are important factors. If we go ahead and see how the 7 attributes relate to the 5 powers, and we can do a quick comparison. Bear me as we set this up. So we have the same 7 attributes we just discussed, and we can compare it with the United States, Russia, China, Europe, and India. And quickly, let's run through the United States and give them certain markings. Green is very good. It's excellent. It is more a determiner of its own fate. Red is bad. Red denotes problems. And yellow is moderate. You have both vulnerabilities and risks. So let's start with the United States and mark the United States on this. So the United States is doing very well, except in the area of demography. Demography I just referred to in my remarks. I think climate change is something that will impact on the United States, but it also has a large political impact in the United States because, strangely enough, the federal structure in the United States has agreed that the states trust the center on defense and on the economy. They don't trust the center on the impact of climate change. So there is an ongoing battle in the United States on who pays for the economic damage that happens, now more and more frequently. But it also has impact on other issues. Let's go to Russia. Russia traditionally has been a continental power, will remain so for the foreseeable future. It is now building up a fairly substantive navy, so we can mark it yellow. Demography, it has a major demographic problem. Technology, the Russians are good. Key technologies, they have come back. Energy, as I said, they will continue to be good. Climate change, I've given them green because of the Arctic acquisition, in a sense, because the melting of the Arctic ice will actually make Russia a continental power with a very large maritime space, which was always not present in Russia for a long time. I've given yellow for Russia because, Ruchir Sharma gave a thumbs up to the Russian economy in the Fareed Zakaria program, and since we all respect Indian Americans, I thought I'll give them an yellow. Let's move to China. China does very well as a continental power. It's acquiring maritime attributes. Demography is not a problem. There are internal problems in the demographics, the rural-urban divide, the ethnic divide, but largely on a whole, we'll give it a green. Climate change. China has problems on the Gobi Desert. Water table in Tibet is a huge vulnerability and an instrument that it would probably will play out. Let's go to Europe quickly. Now, Europe is actually the bottom of the pack here. Like Russia, it has a demographic problem. It never was a continental power. It was a maritime power until 50 years ago. It is less of a maritime power, giving exceptions to the British, French navies. It is very good in technology. It has a huge problem in energy. Economy, we'll see how it stabilizes after Brexit. Climate change, it is not, it itself doesn't have a climate change problem, but the consequences of climate change in the Mediterranean and North Africa is impacting directly on Europe, and Europe doesn't have an answer. So let's go to India quickly. So India is not doing too bad. We are a continental power, but I've given it yellow for reasons I will explain in a while. Maritime power, we have come up. Demography, we don't have a problem. Technology, we are doing well and can do much better. Economy, we will do well. Climate change, because we are dependent on other countries for our water resources, I've given it a yellow. But let's see, because there are other problems in terms of water sharing, the impact of flooding in Bangladesh, the inflow of refugees, and the larger water problem within the country. So we've given it an yellow. So let's then answer the question. We're taking all this. Are we in a new age of geopolitics? Very quickly, the answer is yes, and for the following reasons. The current age of geopolitics, which is now receding, was defined by the end of the Second World War, attributes being the UN Charter veto under Article 27.3 and the territorial settlements under Article 107. We'll come back to territorial settlements under 107 with reference to China. Nuclear weapons, of course, the United States, along with the Soviet Union, built up the nuclear order based on the NPT and the arms control structure. And that is, of course, as we see, sort of disintegrating almost before our eyes. Bretton Woods, globalization, the whole structures of UNCTAD, GATT, WTO, the free trade agreements have gone through a full cycle. Globalization is in retreat in various forms and is in various ways. So that is something, again, further we can discuss. War failures and successful containment. While the United States was immensely successful in containing the Soviet Union, in fact, led to the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the fact is that since 1945, the United States has not won a single war ever. It has won every battle, but it has lost every single war. So you can't have a geopolitical system in your own image lose wars and expect the geopolitical structure to continue in the image in which it was created. Blowing the unipolar movement, this again refers to the United States after the end of the Cold War. For a whole decade, the United States had a complete freeway in Europe. But in retrospect, I think it really did not create any structures that have given Europe stability or the United States any strategic benefit. And some of the questions that come out under President Trump, I think, have certain valid historic roots. The United States had for almost a decade a foreign minister in Russia who woke up every morning and looked at his email box and wanted to see if there was a greeting message from the US Secretary of State. Now, if you blow that sort of opportunity, I mean, those are not going to come back. From the year 2000, under President Putin, Russia has bounced back and is, of course, so part of the American angst is that the 20, 30 years that they had what is called the unipolar movement was really fitted away, of course, in the wars in the Middle East. We have the rise of China. The first rise of China is related to the fact the disappearance of their main strategic competitor, which was the Soviet Union. The second rise of China is due to the free ride that the United States gave because of the nature of economic development in the United States, which has now changed, and something that President Trump has raised again. It led to the deindustrialization of the US. It led to depression of wages. It led to the political instability that we see today. In 1990, China was $360 billion GDP. 2010, $6 billion GDP. 2020, $15 trillion GDP. 2010, $6 trillion. 2020, $15 trillion. I mean, if there's one country that has had a free ride on the international system, it is China. They had a free ride in the nuclear order, and I'll explain to you how what I mean by that. They had a free ride on the economic order, the technological order. So many of the complaints that come out from Europe and the United States are justified, but a little late in the day. So, and actually give us no comfort for the fact that China has risen, has contributed the least to the international order, has exploited the most from the international order. So therefore, what started off in 1945 is, of course, now sort of changing as we speak. So we move from an era of dormant geopolitics to an era of dynamic geopolitics. And this can be described in 12 troublesome peripheries, as I call them, and I'll explain to you in a moment. So this is a map. We will chart out 12 of them. Basically troublesome in the sense that they combine a set of difficulties for the international order. They are all located in a certain band of the world, and we'll go one by one. So let's start with the first. So this is, of course, DPRK, the Russia-China border problem, border issues. There's no problem as yet, but the border issues. The Japan-China problem, the Japan-Korea problem, the United States-China problem, and so that's a collection of problems in square number one. Let's go to square number two. Now, this is, of course, the most popular square that everybody talks about, but we have to take into account this is only one of 12 troublesome peripheries we'll discuss. And this is, of course, the grand old South China Sea problem, which, of course, involves China's problems, acquisitive territorial ambitions in the South China Sea, its problems with Vietnam, other ASEAN countries, the problem with Taiwan, the problem of freedom of navigation. But that's a whole collection of problems. And of course, 1 and 2 are also correlated. Let's go to number 3. Now, this is the India-China border problem. Now, the India-China border problem as a geopolitical fact is something that we inherited almost from independence. As I said, in 1945, under Article 107 of the UN Charter, China agreed as one of the members of the United Nations that it would respect the Charter. So China's refusal to say where its boundary lies with India is, in fact, not just a border problem. It's a territorial acquisition strategy that has rolled on for almost now 70 years. Now let's go to 4, this is now the India-Pakistan problem. We have 700 kilometers of the LAC. That is also now combined with the Afghanistan problem, and is also linked with the problem with China. So you have 3 and 4 also feeding off each other. Let's go to 5. This is the Xinjiang problem of China. The Xinjiang region has 9 countries bordering it. It's often not noticed. Mongolia, Russia. You have the three Central Asian states: India, Pakistan, Afghanistan. It is a region in great ferment, and it is one of the most forthcoming trouble spots geopolitically, but that is also linked to 3 and 4. Anupam, I'm doing not too well with time. You want me to continue or stop?
This is fascinating. I think I speak for everybody when I think that you should please continue for as long as you want to.
Okay, so I'll quickly run through, and we can, if there's interest, we can discuss it more during the question answer. Let's go to 6. 6 is, of course, a little bit of Afghanistan centered on Iran. The problem between Iran and the major Sunni states, the differences within the Sunni states on relations. It also includes the Arab-Israeli conflict, which is now fading into history. It also includes Syria, the intervention by the Russians, the Turks, the Americans, the French, and of course, you have the larger problem of the United States' attitude towards JCPOA. But you also have parallelly a fragmentation of American political power in that region. It is happening in slow motion. The collapse of the Soviet cordon sanitaire in Eastern Europe happened within a year or two. It was visible before your eyes, but the security and economic structure that the United States constructed after 1945, centered around the Saudis, is still there, but it is largely fragmented, and therefore you have the resurgence of instability in North Africa. The Arabs themselves have strong tendencies of deciding for themselves and forming coalitions, not necessarily under the control of the United States. The United States still continues to be a very powerful force in that region, but shares the space with Russia. It shares the space now increasingly with Turkey. You have Iran, which has stood 40 years of sanctions and still standing firm. Very difficult to dislodge a country of that resilience and sustainability. So this is another region that is of importance. Let's go to 7. 7 is the Northern Africa, Libya, the Egyptian intervention and interest in Libya, but also the refugee flows that are threatening Southern Europe. The increasing role of Turkey. Now, Turkey has moved out into the Eastern Mediterranean. It is intervening actively in Libya. The Russians and the Turks cooperate in Syria. They oppose each other in Libya. The trouble, of course, was created by NATO intervention in Libya, where they broke down a structure and put nothing in place. Now, number 7 is also increasing in prominence because it gets linked to the new assertive role in Europe of the new assertive power in Europe, which is Turkey. Now, let's go to number 8. Number 8 is the larger NATO-Russia confrontation in Ukraine, Poland, the Baltics, a little bit of the Caucasus. The Caucasus are fairly under control, but also Georgia, South Ossetia. So this has been a point of pressure for Russia. Russia will continue to take this point of pressure, but the fact is that the longer the pressure that it has on number 8, its ability to deal with number 1 is correspondingly limited. So in the larger geopolitical game, what happens in number 8 has an impact on number 1. Let's go to number 9. Now, the Trump administration has clearly said that it does not require NATO in its old fashion to take on Russia. The United States will take on Russia in a reconfigured NATO, where NATO countries specifically themselves have to pay more. But the United States will do things by itself with certain countries of NATO, and that has resulted in transfer of American troops from Germany elsewhere to Italy and Belgium, but also beefing up of American naval presence in the Barents Sea. There was a huge NATO exercise in the Barents Sea that is to box in the Russian naval force in the North Sea Fleet. And this is the first time that NATO has conducted an exercise in number 9 after the heyday of American naval power under President Reagan. Now let's go to number 10. Now number 10 is the Arctic. Arctic is melting. The Arctic Council is a forum for cooperation. It will be less so in the future. There are several players coming in. Russia will acquire a new seafront, and that is a seafront which with at least seaports open for at least a few months of the year. The United States is beefing up its NATO presence. Most importantly, China is asserting that it is a near Arctic power. So you have problems that Russia is involved with 8 with NATO, 9 with NATO, 10 with NATO and China is also seeing how the 9 and 8 equation takes place vis-a-vis 10. So let's go to number 11. Number 11 is the Mediterranean of the United States. It's the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean, and there are two persistent objectors in number 11, which is Venezuela and Cuba. So despite considerable efforts over, 60, 70 years, the United States is still not able to find an equilibrium in number 11 that conforms entirely to its security interests. So, but those politics also change up and down. But let's go to number 12. Number 12 is, again, the demographic problem that the United States faces. The United States does not have a problem with numbers on immigration. The political system in the United States is unprepared to take on more numbers until a new wire media is found internally. So when President Trump talks about the Mexican wall, it's not just a physical structure, it reflects a fundamental divide in the American political system of how the United States will deal with new influx of people. Now, the reason it's become a troublesome periphery by its own, because historically the United States was an extremely secure continental power. So the United States is a continental power on continental United States. United States is a very powerful continental power in Europe because it has troops, it has NATO and it has troops. But the United States is a very strong maritime power in the Indo-Pacific, but it is not a continental power in Asia. The Chinese fought the Americans twice in the last 50 years. They brought the Americans to a standstill in Korea. They, through the Vietnamese, defeated the United States in the Vietnam War, and therefore the United States is not a continental power in Asia. So there is only so much that the United States can do as a maritime power in the Indo-Pacific, as we see. But the presence of the United States, now that it is withdrawing also from Afghanistan and has thinned down its presence in Central Asia, means that its presence in the United States is fairly limited. United States in Asia is fairly limited as a continental power. Now let's go to India's geopolitics. We inherited the disabilities of 1947, partition, the partition of the country, partition of the people, partition of our army, the withdrawal of our defense points from the Khyber Pass to the Wagah border, Pakistan's emergence as a rentier state. We practically are hemmed in on our continental dimension of our country. So much so, just 1.5% of our trade goes through our land borders. The land borders of the United States, Russia, and EU carry 10% of their trade. That is true of China as well. So almost India is subject to what can be termed in effective terms a blockade on its land borders. Pakistan and China, we had a problem of a three-front problem because of East Pakistan. The 1971 war created the basis for us to convert it from a three-front to a two-front problem. The nuclear order, well, you know the story about how India was left out of the nuclear order that emerged. We were the first country in Asia to reprocess plutonium in 1964, but in 1967, when we approached both the Americans, the Soviets, and the British to give us a security cover, none of the three countries gave us a security cover. Foreign Minister Gromyko told Secretary of State of the United States, Dean Rusk, that India had certain problems before the conclusion of the NPT. Dean Rusk, and he said that was related to China. And Dean Rusk said it is just an alibi of the Indians. They are not interested and there was no need. So the United States and the Soviet Union put together had a blind spot on China. The China did not join the NPT, but they completely ignored India's security concerns on the NPT, and that has remained one of the weak points of the NPT. And it took us almost 30 years to overcome the limitations of that problem. The economic order was important for us for our economic development. India took over $200 billion of aid from the World Bank. We joined the WTO. We were initial enthusiasts for the free trade agreements with a number of countries. But then once we realized that these free trade agreements were not necessarily to our economic benefit, I think we are having rightly a rethink. The multilateral order, again, we were a major participant, but with modest and moderate returns. We are not a member of the Security Council. We've been given a runaround for the Security Council permanent membership for almost 30 years. On terrorism, we get some support grudgingly from the international system. In economic development, it is also so. In terms of regional arrangements or the online movement, India has contributed, but the returns have been marginal and diminishing. Taken all these three together, in my view, there were three best foreign policy decisions in the last 70 years. I think not signing the NPT was, I think, the best decision that India took. It was not so evident at the time that we decided to stay away from the NPT. But if we had signed the NPT in 1967, India would have been permanently consigned to a B-grade country forever. We had the wisdom to stay away from that. And I think we have clawed back into the international nuclear order by our own efforts, despite all the limitations that were put by the nuclear powers. The second most important geopolitically, the best foreign policy decision was to the Indo-Soviet Treaty of 1971. Its relevance was limited for the particular war period, but it created the basis for us to convert a three-front situation to a two-front situation. Imagine for a moment if we had a problem with Pakistan, West Pakistan, China, and East Pakistan. Even today, our strategic geopolitical situation would have been far worse. The third best decision, I think, has been India's decision to oppose and stay away from the BRI. This again will have geopolitical consequences and significance equivalent to our decision to stay away from the NPT. When we decided not to sign the NPT, I think India was quite alone. The general trend in the international system was that the NPT was a good treaty and everybody should sign it. Similarly, when we opposed the BRI, India was amongst very, very few countries which actually said that the BRI was fatally flawed and serious questions were to be raised. So let us now move to just the last two slides. The importance of diplomacy and diplomats. This is more for our young officers on how to understand diplomacy in the age of geopolitics. I think one task of all diplomats is to calculate power. I mean, we are in the business of calculating power, how the ebb and flow of power, but the calculation of power changes when the geopolitics changes. Geopolitics is more brutal, risks are more abundant, wrong decisions take longer to reverse. The multipolar dimension of geopolitics is far more difficult to assess. And therefore, I think we should have the foresight, to look at long-term trends, such as Galileo looked at, comets coming over several decades. And we should have the sense of looking at small changes which have important long-term consequences of the skills that Warren Buffett shows with respect to the American Stock Exchange. It's a difficult combination of having a long-term view, but also having special abilities. Calculating geopolitical power is not easy. Geopolitics is sometimes taken lightly. It is taken as a circus, and each circus also collects its own jokers. Francis Fukuyama said the end of history in 1991. It was more the beginning of US hubris. So our younger officers to Google which of our journalists supported India sending troops to Iraq in 2003, and you will come up with a list of names, which essentially shows that geopolitics analysis is a circus that collects its own jokers. Facilitating acquisition of geopolitical power, I think, is absolutely important. The way India, our ministry, dealt with globalization in the past will change. Our sinews of national power will change. There will be a more hostile international environment. We have to deal with it in a way that will add to our national power, be it in terms of markets, energy, or technology. There will therefore be a greater burden. Now, India has a particular disadvantage because the geopolitical pressures have dramatically increased, and we don't have the privilege that China had. We don't have the privilege that the United States or Britain had when they became big global powers. The advantage that they had was of sequential power. They acquired territories, they acquired economic strength. Economic strength was converted into military strength, and they made their presence felt in the world. India will have to do things simultaneously. The acquisition and consolidation of economic power will have to go hand in hand with military power. And our recent problems that we have faced with China in the last couple of months actually shows that the privilege and luxury of sequencing is just not available. We'll have to do these two things together. So that, of course, increases the pressures that are there on the ministry as we engage with the outside world. Lastly, let me end. Let me also say that just like we were looking at trickle-down economy in the past, trickle-down benefits of economic growth, I think the trickle-down benefits of international engagement are also over. We cannot wait for decades on end for the international community to give us what is our due. At one point in our history, we celebrated the presence of NRIs abroad. The best and the brightest of our generations left and did well, and we are very proud of them, and we should continue to be proud of them. But the main fact was that we were depending on trickle-down benefits. We have to produce the best talent, and that talent has to be within the country. Articulating a new idiom for the age of geopolitics is very important. We are pretty good in terms of international action, not so good in terms of our own articulation. When it was fashionable to talk about the UN Charter and international law, we did that. When it is now fashionable to talk about rules-based international order, we do that. We talk about global commons when the definition of global commons changed and dropped space commons because the United States wanted to have space commons to itself because it had superiority in space technology. We also happily dropped it. Now, independence, of course, in foreign policy starts in independence of the mind. So I think if we have a vision of India, we should have an idiom of our vision. And the idiom should be based on our vision of what we see in the future, how we are based in are rooted in our culture, in our civilization. And finally, we should come up with our own idiom of geopolitics. Let me add a word on hard power and soft power. I think we have a tendency to confuse the two. The age of geopolitics will be an age of hard power. Soft power will be important. Soft power is not a substitute for hard power. Soft power is not hard power. Soft power enables the possibility of hard power, and it enables what is possible to become probable and what is probable to become inevitable. Now, that is the purpose of soft power. But we will not win the geopolitical battles of the coming decades if there is complete overemphasis on soft power. Finally, let me end by saying that finally we are all custodians of an independent foreign policy. Each independent foreign policy has its own lingo, its own axioms, for any particular age. I think we have to acquire, some of you get allergic to the word strategic autonomy. I'm a little old-fashioned. I see no difficulty in the word strategic autonomy. The meaning of strategic autonomy, to my mind, is to say that on the critical issues of war and peace, India will make its own decisions. We will fight our own wars. We will not fight other people's wars. And we will use our means to take our decisions for the betterment of our country. So as we remember Lokmanya Tilak today on the 100 years of his passing, a great nationalist, I think we can draw some inspiration from his own thoughts. And if we are looking at an own idiom, in addition to Vasudeva Kutumbakam, which is a very good universalism contribution of India, along with the International Yoga Day, I think we should look at something called strategic Swaraj, which actually roots our interests in our history, our present needs, and our vision for the future. So let me end by saying that diplomacy in the age of geopolitics is something like this. It's a Van Gogh painting. Most people look at the screaming face, but equally important is the background. Geopolitics is like the background. It is ever present. It impacts on the larger picture. You can't understand the scream without the starry nights behind. And I think this is a good indication to say that calculating and articulating and acquiring power in the age of geopolitics is not an easy business. And especially to our younger colleagues, it would be good if you look far, read widely, think deep. And I can say that India is a geopolitical power. The best is yet to come. And I can't tell you how important and how lucky you are to be in the Indian Foreign Service, because truly there is no service like the Indian Foreign Service. With that, I thank you for your patience and your indulgence, and we'll take it up from there.
Wow. I mean, sir, that's all I can say to begin with. That was, to use an Americanism, an awesome presentation. It was an intellectual tour de force, from Vasco da Gama to Genghis Khan to Prince Vladimir, from stirrups to tanks. It was an extraordinary lecture. I think those of us who are lucky enough to have attended this, and I see 74 participants, which is a very, very large, much more, it's about double of what we expected. I think I would not be overstating it if I say that this would shape our thinking for the years to come. Now, I'm going to request questions. Those of you who want to ask questions, please type or raise your hand. I see one so far. To get the discussion going. I think, sir, that this was a fairly profound lecture, so it will take us some time to organize our thoughts. I have two questions for you, sir, and they are like this. The first is, are you a realist, or are you what they call a liberal in IR theory, and what would you recommend that India should be? So that's one question. So I'm going to abuse my position as moderator and ask a second question, which is, so, I mean, you did talk about soft power, sir. But are ideas a force in geopolitics? So, for instance, Islamic radicalism, or say Marxism when it came up, are these forces in geopolitics? Thank you, sir, and I'll monitor the screen for questions and pass the floor on to those who are asking them, or ask them on their behalf.
Yeah. Can I start, Anupam?
Yes, sir. Please go ahead, sir.
Yeah. The first question on realism or otherwise, Mr. Subramaniam used to say that facts are the strongest theory. facts are the best theory. I think all of us as professional diplomats, employed by our government through a constitutional process, I think should have only one theoretical approach, which is how do we progress and implement and contribute to a foreign security policy of India that will further national interest. To divide ourselves in terms of realism and pessimists or optimists or neo-realists or equivalent words. I mean, strategic autonomy is a good example of how a fairly decent neutral word acquires very strong pejorative connotations, so much so that if someone sort of utters it, I mean, I've known people in our service who go and gargle with with a mouthwash because it brings back memories that actually should not be there if there's clarity of thought. Now, Marxism and Islamic fundamentalism, I think, are not just ideologies, but very powerful mobilizing forces. And Marxism, of course, is now a thing of the past, except in China, there's a new virulent internal mobilizing element. But our ambassador in Beijing is a much better expert on that. But Islamic radicalism is a mobilizing force whose peak we probably have not yet seen. We have seen manifestations of it in our subcontinent, largely inspired from Pakistan and promoted by Pakistan, but it has migrated and it might come back again into Afghanistan after after the new transition takes place. But there are large tracts in Middle East and North Africa, which either are being supported by local governments or are large tracts of ungoverned, lawless territories. And lawless territories will attract this. I didn't, for shortage of time, go into Northern Africa, above the Sahara, Mali and places like that. It's a huge problem. And that combined with the lack of economic deprivation and the COVID is going to devastate both, not just Latin America, but Africa. You have a huge problem. I mean, it's not gone away. Its manifestations are only changing. And the efforts that the European Union did to make itself a fortress has failed. I mean, the part of the problem of the European Union that is faced today, if they were more sensible with respect to the interventions that happened in Syria in 2011, if that had not happened, the flow of refugees to Turkey would have not taken place. The growth of Turkey as a major revisionist power in Europe would have taken place. The immigration problem would not have become the acute problem that it happened in Europe. And maybe the Brits would have still been there. I mean, maybe the Brits would not have left. So part of this problem is self-created, but the wave is still to come.
Thank you, sir. So my first question, there are about 10 ambassadors who have attended the lecture. So the first question that has come from my batchmate, Ambassador Shri Ranganathan. And her question is, how does strategic autonomy differ from the principle of non-alignment?
Yeah. You see, there's non-alignment and non-aligned movement. Non-aligned concept helped us all get us into the UPSC. It is now a thing of the past because the world has changed. But the non-aligned movement is well and alive. And I can give you an example. And non-aligned movement, we should see it as a mobilizing force and as a pocket borough mobilizing force. Anupam, you and I have worked in New York. And I can tell you, I've done 20 years of disarmament. I don't remember a single instance where India went to the non-aligned and asked for something on disarmament matters and we didn't get it. And I don't remember a single instance where India had to change its position because of the demands made by the non-aligned. Not once. We were complete dadas there, and I hope we still are. But that is a point, that is a ready-made constituency. Now, every time if we have ambassadors who go to an online movement meeting and come back and wish to have a shower, the problem is not with the online movement. Its problem is with the understanding of political mobilization in the modern world, that you have multilateral instruments. You give almost nothing in return. You have to give almost nothing in return to the online movement. You can use it if you tend to it like a good gardener. You can tend to it and use it for our own purposes. Now, my view on the online movement is that we should have a non-ideological view. We should have a practical, realistic view and make sure that the Chinese agenda in the developing world is not used by the Chinese through the online movement framework. So I think we should be very active, and I'm very glad that the Prime Minister addressed the online movement through video conference. I think it's a very good change.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. The next question is from Shashwati De, sir. She asks, as per comparison of the 7 attributes of geopolitics, are we to say that G2 is an inevitability? So how do we look at the reform of UNSC of adding new members when the power balance of the P5 itself is recalibrating?
You see, is there a problem? Is there a possibility of a G2? The answer is always yes. If there is competition, global powers also find ways of cooperation. That happened between the Soviets and the Americans, and the NPT is a very good example of a G2 system creating issue. The problem of confrontation between the United States and China always carries within it seeds of cooperation at some stage. Now, as we speak, in rhetorical terms and in terms of dismissal and throwing out of diplomats, U.S.-China relations have never been as bad as this in living memory. However, there is still a $200 billion trade deal that is still operational. Neither the Americans have walked out of it, nor have the Russians, nor have the Chinese walked out of it. And in the talks in Vienna, over the weekend, the Americans happily dropped their insistence with the Russians on the Chinese coming and sitting with them before any arms control process takes place. So, I mean, my advice for great powers is, one of the definitions of great power, being a great power, is the lack of consistency. I mean, you earn the privilege to be inconsistent. That is one of the attributes of great powers. So just to think that, they are fighting on 10 issues doesn't mean that they will not cooperate on the 11th issue. Now, the attributes show that the United States is well ahead. It's got some very, very powerful attributes that will take it several decades ahead. China, Russia, and India, in different ways, are in one group. It is Europe that is actually in the bottom group. So I think we need to make that distinction, because geopolitics needs to be calculated on multiple axes. It's just not military power, just not technology, just not energy. If you combine all these together, actually you tend to get a different picture, and that is the reason I sort of made this, pictorially, it's more comprehensible.
Thank you, sir. The next question is from Aman Puri. I think he's just going in at CG in Dubai. So his question is, with India's current GDP per capita, how do we justify a green dot on the economy?
First, I think, I'm a great supporter of Atmanirbhar Bharat. I must say. And I think the foreign policy equivalent of Atmanirbhar Bharat is strategic autonomy. The two are twin brothers. they go together, which is stop depending on the international system for your growth. You keep your doors open. You will not do more for the international system than you will do for yourself. Stop believing that trickle-down effects will build your country. Sit down, pull up your straps, and build up your own country. That is the national purpose driven behind Atmanirbhar Bharat. Now, India has several positive attributes. We have an extremely good demography. Our economic fundamentals are very good, and after the COVID impact, the rebound will be very, very powerful. Technology, we are, for the first time, we are at least in the game with respect to AI, digital technology startups. In all the previous industrial revolution stop points, India caught up after a decade, 2 decades, or even 3 decades. But in this time around, at least we are in the game. And I have great confidence that, and there is great talent in the country. There's great talent in the country. So I would say that economy in a 5-year perspective, in a 10-year perspective is far more promising than the disabilities that we find ourselves inherited in 1947 that as a continental power, as I explained to you, which major country in the world, name me one, that has 700 odd kilometers of LAC, which is disputed, and 4,000 odd kilometers of the land border with China that is disputed, with large chunks of territory given by Pakistan to China, with just 1.5% of our trade going through our land borders, which is in all the manners of definition and a land blockade. Which country has this problem? There is no other country that has this problem. So therefore, when the government took the decision in terms of overturning, reversing the 370, Article 370, I think it is a positive step of immense geopolitical importance. With Kashmir, of course, Jammu and Ladakh, it is important in terms of developmental issues. But in terms of geopolitics, we are saying that we are wanting to address the problems that we inherited and have gotten frozen since 1947. So I think it's a very long journey. It's a very difficult journey. But the fact is that at least we are addressing the core root problems that we face as a continental power.
Sir, I have 4 more questions, and I think I'm going to. So, are you okay with taking 3 or 4 more questions?
Yes.
So, and then I think I'll ask. I can't take any more questions because some of the questions are fairly substantial. So, the first of these is from Ambassador Sandeep Chakravarti, sir. His question is: has China reached the peak of its geopolitical power, and will it now see a pushback from other powers?
Should I answer?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'll ask the questions individually. They are quite.
Okay. No. First of all, Anupam, it doesn't have to be question-answer thing. I would be very happy if some people, some of our colleagues, especially ambassadors, have a comment to make. It doesn't have to be necessarily I don't have to speak all the time. Secondly, no, China has not reached the peak of its power. It is only the beginning of its power. And it has a long way to go. The change that has happened this year, and my good friend Vikram will correct me on this, the international perception of Chinese growth of power there's been a qualitatively different change, because China was not only a parasitic power, China was also a surreptitious power. By design. And the world community, for various reasons, some by consciously, some unconsciously, they were unable to adapt the magnitude of growth of China. Now, China will grow. Its maritime power is still to evolve. Its continental power, given the weakness on the Eurasian continent, will expand. We'll have to take that into account. Technology, it is taken off. 5G technology is a good example. Energy, it is vulnerable, but it has tied up a lot of balances for it to ensure energy security, including from Russia, from Central Asia, from the Middle East. Climate change, we don't know. See, there are two fundamental problems in China, as far as I know. With the decrease in external trade, which is inevitable, China has no option but to spend more money internally. The brittle political system in China has taken a certain amount of economic empowerment. But if there is a huge jump in economic empowerment, will the brittle political system in China be able to take that gap between diminutive political empowerment and maximum economic infusion? That is a question that the experts will need to answer. Climate change, the Tibetan water plateau, the progression of the Gopis Desert, the rural-urban divide, the ethnic problems in Tibet and Xinjiang, and the Xinjiang problems are just beginning. They will run for decades. So we've not seen the best or the worst of China. We'll probably have to wait for a couple of decades more for that to happen.
Sir, related to this, and I think this is a question which I had planned to ask myself, is a question from Ambassador Sanjeev Singla. So his question is, how are Russia and China subsuming their tensions relating to the Russian Far East in their larger common geopolitical interests? And he has a second question, I think, as a part of which you addressed. But how do you see Russian tensions with Turkey in the larger geopolitics in the Middle East today? Sir, if I were to add a question, which since by Gloria, our secretary, she says her question is, how does the new technologies that are coming in, renewables, batteries, and so on, how does it affect the Middle East? It's an area in which we have substantial interests. I think that is and how would this affect Russia's place in that region? So these are the sort of three questions which are clumped together. And after this, I just have one more question each from Ambassador Gautam Dharmendra and Ambassador B.N. Reddy, and that's it. So I'll ask those separately. Those are also interesting questions, sir. Thank you.
Okay, so we have Russia, China, Russia, Turkey, and new technologies in the Middle East. So let me quickly run down Russia, China. Russia was built on dealing with Western Europe over 700 years. Western Europe today is on secular decline. It will take several decades to decline, but for Russia, Western Europe is no longer its primary security reference point. Russia rarely had good relations with China. When Russia was expanding in the last 2 centuries, China was down. Russia expanded beyond the Urals and reached Vladivostok and stayed put there. In 1860, they signed a treaty between Russia and China. Now, the same historic claims that China makes in other parts of the world, China does not make with Russia. Because in 2001, they signed a treaty saying that they have no territorial claims with each other. However, in 1989, while there were demonstrations going on in Tiananmen Square, and you would expect Deng Xiaoping to be embarrassed and a little nervous about the threat to challenge to his authority. Deng Xiaoping met Gorbachev on the last visit of the Soviet leader before the Soviet Union collapsed. In a moment of supreme confidence, Deng Xiaoping reminded Gorbachev that what mistakes you made in the Soviet Union is your mistakes. We will learn from your mistakes, but we will not repeat them. And he said, by the way, there is 1.5 million square kilometers of Chinese territory presently with the Soviet Union. We will leave it on the table. We will talk about it some other time. So that doesn't mean that China and Russia our allies. They are not, except in the columns of the Times of India. They are partners, yes, because Russia doesn't see any benefits coming out of the dual containment policy that the United States presently pursues. The United States presently pursues a policy of dual containment because, as Ambassador Bill Burns wrote in the latest article of The Atlantic, and I would recommend all of you to read it, especially our young officers, because the United States suffers from a triple problems of strategic exuberance, military fetish, and unthinking diplomacy. So the United States is not in a position to calculate who is a greater problem. It thinks that it has the resources to take on Russia and China together. However, lately, I think there has been a rethink in the United States, which from our point of view is not such a bad thing, which is to say that while Russia is troublesome and creates problems for the United States interests in Europe, it is no way near the problem that is created by China to the overall international system. Now, Russia is basically a status quoist power. I mean, you can count Crimea in and out, but essentially it wants to retain what it has. China is an expansionist power, and an expansionist power, by its own comments, by its own definition, it says that it has historic claims which it does not define. It defines it only bilaterally with certain countries and concludes a deal only when it has made something out of that particular deal. Now, how this will play out under the next administration is something that the whole world will watch. The Russians are watching it very, very carefully. The Russians have been positioning themselves extremely well vis-a-vis what will happen with the United States and China. They know that they will not benefit from a US-China problem because ultimately it can also lead to a G2. There is strong energy ties between Russia and China. There is problems in the Far East, and Korea, Japan, and India watch very carefully on that, and that again is a geopolitical point. So it's a space that we'll have to watch and see. But I think to draw the conclusion that Russia and China are allies is completely false. Russia and Turkey. Turkey is a problem of various dimensions to Europe. Turkey has grown, again, quite unexpectedly. It has taken advantage in its own way of how to push forward its, and the totality of Turkish ambitions are fairly substantial. And the only country in that region which is on very good talking terms with Turkey is Russia, because Russia has given Turkey S-400 missiles, largely on account to create a dissonance in NATO. Russia and Turkey fight each other through proxies in northern Syria during the night. During the day, they do joint patrols. The Turks want to take over Eastern Mediterranean. The Russians have good relations with the Greeks. They are dealing with the Greeks and also excellent relations with the Israelis. So they deal with the Israelis. The Russians have excellent relations with the Egyptians. So apart from a few Russian forces in Libya opposing the Turkish armed forces, the Egyptians are getting in, supported by the Saudis. Now, in terms of oil, the Russians are in with MBS of Saudi Arabia and President Trump of the United States. They decide whether oil prices will be at $40, $45, or will come down, or occasionally they fight and bring it down to $20. Now, the reason why we give Russia very high marks as geopolitical power is just because of its ability to influence events across a wide swathe and collect leverages along the way and trade them off at a global level is quite unparalleled. I mean, the only other country that is able to do that is the United States. China is nowhere near. You know, the Middle East is going through several transformations. First, the most important transformation is that the absolute power and control that the United States had on the Middle East is loosening up. Partly by design, partly by circumstance. Partly by design because the United States no longer requires oil from the Middle East and therefore does not place the same premium on stability in the Middle East as it used to place in the years past. Secondly, the Arab states also have acquired a certain geopolitical weight of their own. Saudi Arabia is not the Saudi Arabia of 10 years ago. They are engaging with Israel. Israel is no longer the Israel of 10 years ago. I mean, Israel was weighed down by the Arab-Israeli conflict. Israel has now partners across the Middle East. The main objective is to deal with Iran. The main interlocutor on Iranian presence in Syria is the channel between Bibi Netanyahu and President Putin between the Israelis and the Russians. So, you know, everybody is trading. Some trade in oil, some trade in influence, some trade in weapons, some trade in geopolitical, because there is tradable geopolitical entities now, commodities now. Because when geopolitics was frozen, you couldn't trade parts of geopolitics because, you know, the big powers would come and slap you down. Because the big powers are unable to control geopolitics in regional areas, regional powers become more influential and they have something to trade. So Turkey has something to trade with Iran. Iran has something to trade with, you know, with the Russians. The Russians trade something else with them. So the Middle East is in ferment. Now, how it will impact on the oil prices, we'll have to wait and see. I'm not an expert on the energy situation. It will have an impact, but we'll wait and see.
Thank you, sir. The next question is from Ambassador Dharmendra. He said that his question is, in the coming decades of the 21st century, which type of governance model is more suitable for sustaining geopolitics? Democracies or authoritarian systems? Are we seeing democratic political systems in geopolitical retreat? The EU is hamstrung by multiple decision-making centers. The US is stymied by capitalist pressures of profit incentivizing motives. Into this space, we see authoritarian government systems move nimbly and quickly.
Well, warm greetings to Damu and Tehran. You see, the COVID pandemic divided the world into two parts. It was not along democracy, non-democracy, not along authoritarian, non-authoritarian. It is countries which had state capacity to deal with the consequences, the economic, health, and social consequences, and those countries which did not have the capacity to do so. That doesn't mean that is the only criteria, but I think in terms of geopolitics, I would say that national development has to be more synchronized with defense and security development. There is a case for better utilization of our resources, of our decision making, because the privileges that you had in a more stable world are no longer available to you. So you need to build roads, you have to build roads. It doesn't matter whether, you know, on what direction of the political spectrum you come. But I would still stick to democracy as a great enabler, because democracy, especially in a country like ours, is the best guarantee of social stability and social inclusion, because you have a national purpose, a national program of increasing your defense. It is through a democratic means that the best social and political support can be generated for ambitious national programs. And the time has come for ambitious national programs with respect to our national security.
Thanks. So the last question is from Ambassador B.N. Reddy. And his question has two parts, sir. The first part is, how is COVID-19 going to, he first says it's a brilliant lecture, sir. Which incidentally all the others who have asked questions have said. What would be the effect of COVID-19 on energy markets, sir? and on the geopolitics of energy, particularly when it comes to oil and gas. You've answered that in part by saying that it is affected, but one really doesn't. One has to wait and see how it plays out. And the next part of it, I think, is also related to another thing which you had said earlier, that consumers now have a say in energy dynamics. So his question is, how can India take advantage of this fast-changing energy dynamics in the last 5 months? That's the last one.
Yeah, sure. So the energy situation in the world, of course, was impacted by COVID. Yeah, largely on account of the fact that there was a precipitous economic shutdown, lockdowns. But it is interesting that all the major producers quickly got together and worked out a deal amongst themselves. It was a little rough and it was a little unpleasant. But the fact is that oil prices were again repositioned at a place where none of the major oil producers would be fatally hit. The oil industry, especially the shale industry in the United States, was particularly hit. And I think President Trump intervened to bring back, with Russia and with Saudi Arabia, to bring back international oil prices to a certain decent level so that the shale industry would not be fatally wounded in the United States. Secondly, with respect to economic recovery, it is instructive that in all the major oil gas producing countries, the least amount of drawback of national plans, because of the economic impact, a number of other national priorities have been scaled down. Not in the field of energy as much as elsewhere. So energy is really geopolitical. Energy is changing, and nobody wants to lose market share, because once you lose market share, I mean, you are in a sense out of the game for a very long time. Now, in terms of consumers, this is something that our Minister for Petroleum and Natural Gas has been saying. It has greater resonance. I think we need to find a way of leveraging this politically, geopolitically, and convert it into an asset. Now, there are 2-3 aspects to this. One is, of course, the size of our market. Second is the preferential treatment that we can give to long-term contracts, where countries which are invest with India's demand in mind. But that will depend on the fact that we create a system of multipolarity. Now, we should not depend on any single source. So in 2030 or 2040, we would envisage Middle East still to be a very major supplier for us, but we would have a huge increase in relative terms from the United States and a huge increase of energy supplies from Russia. Now, since I spent this entire evening speaking very little about Russia, let me also earn my bit being posted here in Moscow to say that Russian energy situation is changing. You can see it in 2 levels. One is the Russians ran the decrepit Soviet-era energy systems until the year 2000. From the year 2000, they made new investments to bring those old Soviet-era oil and gas things to a certain stability. But in the last decade, there's been a huge expansion. 2 pipelines to China, Siberia, Power of Siberia 1 and 2, Turkish Stream 1 and 2, Nord Stream 2 to add on to 1. There have been huge oil deposits and gas deposits that have been discovered. The Yamal gas deposits where Novatek works, where we are looking at some areas of cooperation, the deposits will last 130 years more. Now, our interest in the Russian Far East is also a stepping stone for our interest in the Arctic. And when we look at the Arctic, we want to create incentives for Russia to engage with the Indo-Pacific as a stakeholder. That if there is stuff that is coming out of Yamal to come to Vladivostok, to come to Chennai, they have a stake as much as we do in seeing that this eastern part of the world is something that we have an interest, they have an interest, And I'm absolutely confident that despite all the rhetoric that comes out in the press and on the Indo-Pacific, the Russians assess things not by form, they assess things by substance. And when they see substance on the table, they will have an incentive to engage. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. This was, I would like to conclude, sir, firstly by thanking you, by thanking all the people who asked questions. I think I would unhesitatingly say that this is probably the most memorable talk I've heard by a Foreign Service officer in my career. So, you know, so that I have not given to exaggeration. So this is my view. It was a fascinating talk on strategic culture, on the kind of nation that we want to be, and how we as Foreign Service officers all need to have a vision of where we want to take our country. I'm reminded of two things that, so there were many memorable statements which you have a gift of putting into one-liners. Two of them I remember. One of them, one which you told me while we were walking on, I think on 3rd Avenue, I still remember. It was many years ago, so probably 15 years ago, and you had said that to be a great power is like to be inside a nuclear submarine. The pressure on the hull is constant and enormous, and a single weakness and the hull collapses. I've used that very frequently. I think on par with that is the line that you used today, that one of the attributes of a great power is the luxury of being inconsistent. So these are, I think, fairly profound remarks that you made. There was a fascinating discussion between ambassadors. I think that the young officers would greatly benefit from seeing the way in which our ambassadors in Tel Aviv, in Tehran, the head of energy diplomacy in our ministry had questions from you on Russia and Turkey, Russia and China, on democracy, on the nature of the geopolitical system, on economics. I would end by saying, sir, that two things, sir. One is that, again, one of the things which you had told me once when I was a young officer is that when you can cultivate your mind, and you had mentioned that in relation to another politician of that time, and how he rose to the highest positions in the land by cultivating his mind. The second is that, and this I think, so we are all birds of passage in our service. Young officers have a long way to go. They will sit at the high table and honor and a prestige which was, I think, denied to us. When they do, and when they have to take big decisions, I'm sure that the lecture that you gave today will be like a light unto them, that look inside you, look inside yourself as a nation for answers. Don't borrow from others. Be strong yourself. Thank you very much, sir. It was a privilege and an honor for me to moderate this discussion and to hear one of our finest officers ever speak to us. Thank you. Gloria, over to you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Sir, it has been an absolute delight to listen to you. And really, thank you for this wonderful treat that you have given us with such clarity you've spoken. And it only reflects the mastery of the subject that you have. And really, sir, it has been fantastic. I think many of us, all of us, in fact, would remember it for a long time to come. And I'm very sure that all of them who have attended this Saturday evening lecture, listening to you, will be very happy that they have made this time well spent, and they have, they have spent this time in listening to such a wonderful exponent of diplomacy. So really, thank you so much. We cannot be more grateful, sir, for having shared with us this really profound knowledge that you have had. And I also would like to, at this point of time, thank our moderator who has done a very wonderful job in also sharing his experiences and recalling a number of instances that he had, that you have been with him and telling us these stories, the time that you've spent together. I think these are very, very interesting, and they will definitely stay with us for a long time to come. I also take this opportunity to thank the ICWA for this platform, and also the other members who are very active in the ICWA in terms of helping us with the technology. And I would like to particularly thank Nutan Mahavar for having partnered with us in this exercise. And I, last but not the least, thank all our colleagues from all over the world who have joined us today. I'm sure they'll go with a very happy mind and with a lot of things to think about. Thank you so much once again, sir, and we wish you a very happy week.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's been an honor. Thank you.